Hello everyone, Kaoz here, and welcome to another old school RuneScape video. Just like many of my uploads, someone came to stream the other day asking about which mega weapon is the most viable to buy first. I answered the question, but it gave me a decent idea of making a video going over important information you should know before making this big decision, and joining the big leagues of old school RuneScape thanks to your Scythe Vitur, your Twisted Bow, or your Tumeken Shadow. Boys and girls, we are closer than ever to the big 100k subscriber mark, so if you find this video useful, make sure to subscribe with notifications on, drop a like for the YouTube overlords, and join our Discord server with the link in the description to play with me and our amazing community. So instead of people asking what mega weapon they should buy first and me saying something like, well, just whatever helps your favorite content, we will talk about the perfect time to buy your first mega, minimum gear to go along with it, as well as minimum gear for the other combat styles, just so your entire bank doesn't get carried by a single item. We will then take a look at gear progression for each mega weapon, and finally places to rebuild on your way to more powerful gear, and of course another mega weapon when you have the funds. I hope you enjoyed this video, and let's begin. To start, when should you buy or think about buying your first mega weapon? The short answer is, well, whenever you have the money for it, whether it be with straight cash, or by selling other pieces of gear in order to be able to afford it. I'll try not to make this too rambly, but it involves other decisions I would think about carefully if I was ever in this position. The very first thing I would do is create a bank tab where I would drag items I am willing to sell whenever I'm getting close to the mega weapon I want. For example, if I want a Shadow as my first mega weapon, I would make a bank tab where I would put my money, some utility items I'm willing to sacrifice for this powerful item, and most importantly, other pieces of gear for which you have items to substitute when you take the plunge. If I have gear like bandos and primordial boots, these would go on that new tab for me to know how much of those items contribute to the mega weapon. And when I sell them, I would get myself a fighter torso, obsidian legs, and an iconic pair of dragon boots to avoid being left with nothing for those slots in the melee category. I would also think about having a little stash of supplies for me to go bossing once I have my mega weapon, because buying it and then not having enough money for these items is definitely going to feel bad. I mean, you don't want to be the guy raiding with a Tumeken Shadow and eating monkfish, right? Think about stocking up on things like brews and super restores, combat and ranging potions, as well as anglerfish and prayer potions, just to mention a few. Finally, you should always keep some items in mind that, although powerful, can easily be disposed of to reach your next milestone, and make enough money to get them back eventually. One of the best examples that come to mind is the imbued or saturated heart. These go for above 100 million GP, and although it's nice to give more juice when using magic, you can definitely sell it if working towards a Scythe or a T-bow. Just remember to avoid selling it if your first target is the Tumeken Shadow. Up next, I want to give you a quick rundown of gear I would personally have for all three combat styles, in case I'm selling most of my gear for my first big ticket item. And these will help quite a bit if you're doing a moneymaker that requires all three combat styles like raids, or even if you want to take a break from using your brand new toy. Just remember that this is my personal recommended loadout, but you can go even lower if you need to. For melee, I would not get a mega weapon if I'm not able to afford or obtain these items at the bare minimum. Nessie Helm, Fire Cape, Amulet of Fury, a Blessing, Fighter Torso, Obsidian Legs, Bearer's Gloves, Dragon Boots, and a Light Bearer. If not for the Scythe, I would also get an Abyssal Tentacle, and of course my trusty Dragon Defender. Not including the whip and a Dragon Defender, this gear will run just a little over 6 million GP as of the time of making this video, and an additional 2 mil GP for the Tentacle for a grand total of 8 mil. If you ask me, this is pretty decent gear for that amount. Range gear will be pretty even without a weapon, because to get the most out of this combat style on a budget, I would get the Blessed Dragonhide pieces, Amulet of Fury, Bearer's Gloves, and a Brimstone Ring. Untradables include an Assembler, a Blessing or Amethyst arrows depending on your weapon, and that's about it. If we take Seradomin as the cheapest set, this gear will run a little under 6.8 million GP. Your weapon of choice is where we have a little more flexibility. And from cheap to expensive, we have a Sunlight Hunter crossbow, which I don't really recommend for high level bossing, either a Rune or Dragon crossbow, and finally a Toxic Blowpipe. This final item will cost you 7 million GP, so the same as all of the gear we have showcased. But it really is that good even after some nerfs, and something you cannot go on without your rebuild after a mega weapon purchase. Finally, we have magic, and hold on because this one is going to be a lot more expensive. For armor, you have more options because a lot of gear gives 1% magic damage bonus, but I would stick to a set consisting of Aram Hood, top and bottom, an imbued magic cape, occult necklace, a tormented bracelet, bloodbark boots, and a brimstone ring as well. These items will run an approximate total of 31 million GP, and if you want to save just a little bit of money, you could start without the tormented bracelet to remove 21 million from the total, and make it your first purchase when you get the shadow. If your first mega weapon is either a scythe or a twisted bow, you should also buy a trident of the seas or a trident of the swamp, and the staple word of eliteness for encounters that require multiple combat styles. Alright, so that is the gear I recommend starting with, or having as bare minimum when you buy a mega weapon and need to complement your other combat styles well. Up next, I want to do a little gear progression to tell you what the purchase order is for each combat style to get more juice out of your new toys, and then get to the money making part of the video. Just a final thing to note, remember that this is a small gear progression for a single combat style, and if you want to check out the most optimal order for weapons and gear for all combat styles combined, you should definitely check out my 2024 gear progression guide. For now, we will take a look at melee, ranged, and magic on their own. Let's start with the Sctyhe Rebuild. Copy the gear I mentioned previously, and if this is what you're rocking, we are going to improve a little by little in order to work up to max best in slot gear. The very first item to upgrade is a Berserker Ring Imbued. A Light Bearer is useful when using special attack weapons often, but for more strength bonus, this is our first stop. After an Amulet of Fury, get yourself an Amulet of Torture for our next slot item to focus on the melee style and give us more strength bonus as well as offensive stats. A Serpentine Helmet will go very well with our new Amulet, but if charges seem too expensive, you can easily stick to a Nezi Helm, although Zulrah scales are relatively cheap nowadays. An item that has remained pretty stable over the years is a pair of Ferocious Gloves. This is the best in slot item for their category for melee, and you won't need to upgrade them at all. I would say Blood Moon Chestplate and Tassets go next. This is a quote-unquote budget alternative to bandos, and even though you need to repair them, charges are not going to run out too quickly to repair them at the Bob's Axe shop. The Native Slot Face Guard is a good purchase granted you're focusing on something other than Slayer, and the superior strength bonus in the head slot is really attractive. A pair of Primordial Boots is next, and despite these being a lot more expensive than Dragon Boots, our next upgrades are even more expensive in comparison, so this is another best in slot item that we won't need to upgrade for a while. Like I said in my main gear progression video, you could do very well with Blood Moon, but if you want an upgrade that won't cost upwards of 100 million GP, go for the iconic pair of Bandos Chestplate and Tassets to round out affordable upgrades. I say affordable because the next thing on our list is an Ultor Ring. At nearly 200 million GP, this provides 4 additional strength bonus in the ring slot, and it's one of the most powerful items in the game. Our final upgrade for the next slot is an Amulet of Rancor. This new best in slot item provides a 2 strength bonus over the Amulet of Torture, and if you want a cheaper upgrade, you can easily get this before the Ultor Ring. Before you get Torva, I highly recommend getting an Infernal Cape with either a Bofa or a Twisted Bow. You really don't want to be the guy with Torva and a Fire Cape because this armor set will put you very close to a T-Bow, and it's better to challenge yourself to get the best in slot melee cape rather than using it on Torva. And speaking of, last but not least, we have a Torva set. I would personally get the helmet first, followed by the legs and finally the body. With this gear, you will have the best possible melee items in your bank as of February of 2025 to give your Scythe of vitur the highest damage output it can provide. Ranged would be a little simpler. The only thing to mention here before the progression is that I heavily recommend keeping an Anguish to give the Twisted Bow more juice, but let's imagine you don't in case you really need those 20 million GP. One simply cannot use a T-Bow without this powerful Zenyte necklace, and it absolutely has to be your first purchase after dumping nearly 1.6 billion GP for a new toy. I then recommend the base Masori set starting with a mask, and then whatever piece you can afford between the body and the chaps. When you can, purchase the other piece for the full set. This is something you can definitely skip until the end, but I would personally go for a full set of Fortified Masori next, because those defensive stats will make content like the Inferno much easier. Get it in the same order you got the base set, with the body, chaps, being interchangeable too. Something you technically cannot buy is a Dizana's Quiver, and if you have a Scythe to make the Colosseum easier, your Twisted Bow will be the perfect pair to get through this challenge to earn the best in slot range cape. If you're not up for it though, you can easily stick to an assembler and get the quiver whenever you are ready. Up next we have the Zerite Vambraces, and despite these going down in price over the years, these remain quite expensive because they are the best in slot gloves for ranged, and again, you're not gonna need to upgrade them after you get them. Something you won't really need too often, but it makes sense to buy second to last is a Venator Ring. You won't be wearing it too often, and if you find yourself using other rings like the Lightbearer for a multi-purpose item, this should definitely be a low priority. The last item, not just for the range gear progression, but all 3 combat styles combined, is a pair of Pegation Boots. You're better off with a pair of blessed Sctyhe boots, and you should only buy these if you have every single best in slot item in your bank. Magic is going to be even simpler, especially if you already have the Tormented Bracelet, because we have best in slot for our cape, necklace, and gloves. So let's see how we give the Tumeken Shadow even more power. I recommend getting the Eternal Boots just to get them out of the way, and with them we achieve another best in slot for the low cost of 7 million GP. We don't really have much else to buy, and we move on to a full set of virtues. Just like Torva and Masori, I would personally buy the masks first, followed by the bottoms, and then the body since it's the most expensive piece. We follow the same pattern for full Ancestral, and that pointy hat should definitely be your first purchase. When you have money for the legs and the body, get them as soon as possible for the best in slot magic armor in the game. Close that out with a Magus ring for that chunky magic damage bonus in the ring slot, and you have now achieved the most powerful magic set to do massive damage with a shadow. Let's now talk about the elephant in the room, and the reason why you are here in the first place. Which mega weapon should you buy first, and what content can you do with it to make even more money? I will give you my personal ranking first, and then move on to encounters to give you consistent money, or bosses that contain big ticket items to accelerate your rebuild. The very first mega weapon I recommend buying is a Twisted Bow. The ranged combat style is absolutely busted, and the fact that you only need a Necklace of Anguish and Amethyst arrows to do massive DPS is a big win for the mega weapon coming from the Chambers of Xeric. The fact that it doesn't run on charges makes it pretty attractive for people who dumped their entire bank for this item and can't afford recharging it every now and then. Up next, I recommend a Tumeken Shadow. This doesn't mean that the Scythe is bad, but the combination between the best in slot ranged and magic weapons open the door to a ton of possibilities when it comes to high level bossing and raiding, which will lead to tons of money. But more on that later. Despite virtues and ancestral being quite expensive upgrades for more power, it's not going to take long for you to get those robes when you have the shadow at your disposal. In general, I recommend the Scythe last because high level and consistent moneymakers like the Theater of Blood and the Fortis Colosseum will be just a little out of reach for someone who just obtained this bad boy. Despite receiving buffs in the past to avoid using so many charges when hitting zeros, it remains a relatively expensive weapon to use, and you will need to make a decent bit of GP in order to upkeep those charges. I'll mention this one final time. This is just my personal opinion, and the purchase order is heavily going to depend on what content you like the most, or even if you already have previous experience doing it. If you already have a dedicated TOB team and you know the mechanics, of course you should buy a Scythe first to aim for one of those juicy splits. In general though, that is how I would personally acquire my mega weapons again. In this final part of the video, I want to talk about moneymakers specifically for those shiny mega weapons, whether it be solo or in combination with another one. Just like before, this is what I personally recommend because it's my preferred content, but make sure to explore different bosses to see what you like the most on your way to millions or billions of GP. If you get a Scythe first, your lottery encounter is the Theater of Blood. If you get a side split or even on a 5-man team, you are looking at more than 300 million GP if someone on your team gets lucky. Even without it, items like a Sanguinesti Staff or the Avernic Defender Hilt will at least pay for a ton of charges to keep the ball rolling. Other lottery item bosses include the Fosani's Nightmare, which features incredibly expensive items if you land on those uniques. Pieces of the Inquisitor set, the mace, the staff, or any of the orbs will definitely make your eyes pop when you see the loot beam on the ground. Just be advised that without them, you will literally lose money at this boss. The most consistent moneymaker in the entire game is of course the Fortis Colosseum. If you're able to complete at least 2 runs per hour, not only are you a great player, but also will see upwards of 10 million GP per hour without the uniques. This is not for the faint of heart, so manage expectations when doing this. Finally, you can't forget about bosses that drop decent items and have expensive uniques such as Duke Succulus, Cerberus, the Grotus Guardians, and if you're looking for an AFK pet that drops a ton of elite clues, Sarachnis with a pair of Arania boots is the way to go. For the Twisted Bow we have even more options, and the big ticket item encounter is of course the Chambers of Xeric. I'm kinda sensing a pattern with these mega weapons, aren't you? The good thing about it is that we have even more consistent moneymakers, but another lottery boss I would definitely try is Commander Zeliana. Thanks to run energy changes, you won't need as many stamina potions, and seeing either an Orbital Crossbow or a Saradomin Hilt on the ground will definitely be worth the grind. For a more consistent GP output, we have the Phantom Muspa, Zulra, Hydra, the Giant Mole, and even non-bosses featuring the Brutal Black Dragons, which I did at one point during my own Twisted Bow rebuild. Not really a consistent moneymaker, but you can definitely try the 8 to 0 Zami method in case you are looking for a pet, or this uniques if you want to use a Twisted Bow instead of the Scorching Bow. And of course, you cannot get a Twisted Bow and do not try the Inferno since it will be your best chance at success against the Tiskal Zuck and his minions. Right after I maxed, I bought bonds over several months to afford this powerful weapon, and I locked myself to the Inferno for 3 weeks until I finally beat it after 27 attempts, with close to 0 high-level PVM experience. The Tumeken Shadow will be an insane moneymaker for the Tombs of a Mascot, because the passive effect will give this weapon a ×4 damage multiplier while inside the Tombs of a Mascot, as opposed to ×3 in the rest of Gielinor. With an Ostentum's Fang and a blowpipe in hand, solo or group Tombs of a Mascot is something you simply cannot skip when doing a Shadow rebuild on your way to those beautiful purple chests. For big ticket items, the Shadow will be insane at all 4 regular God Wars dungeon bosses, and from most to least powerful we have General Grardor, Ziliana, Kriara, and Krill Susaroth. Despite providing garbage loot, these bosses' special drops are going to be very juicy for the bank for your next upgrade. More consistent moneymakers are also Zulrah and the Phantom Uspa. Although for these 2 bosses I would heavily recommend having a good weapon for range because mage only Zulrah is kinda painful, and trying to hit the Phantom Uspa with mage on the range phase will be a Herculean task. For a super consistent moneymaker that only requires a Shadow, the Whisper is absolutely something you want to do during the rebuild, because along Duke, she provides great drops that become even better if you can get through the entire encounter without taking any damage. Even without the Bellator Vestige, items coming from this source are massive, and will only require prayer potions to stay here for a long time. Remember, you can mix and match these powerful weapons to make profitable encounters much easier, and work your way up to all 3 of them to make endgame content in old school RuneScape an absolute breeze. So, what are you waiting for? If you can, start planning what your first mega weapon is going to be. Boys and girls, we come to the end of the video. I really hope you enjoyed and you learned something useful. If you did, tell me in the comments what mega weapon you would buy first, or which one you got first and why. If you include the term RSN and your username in your comment, you'll be entered in our weekly bond giveaway, for which we will pick a winner on Friday's stream. A massive thank you to all the legends you see on screen that have decided to support this channel monetarily. Your contribution goes a long way for my family in a third world country, and a local animal shelter we help every month. If you want to be part of this list of legends, click the join button below to see all the cool perks you can get in the videos, in the live streams, and of course in the Discord. In the next one, I don't know what we will be looking at since I'm working on multiple videos at the time, but I can guarantee it will be a banger. For now, I hope you have an amazing day, have an amazing week, and I will see you then. Peace.